Welcome, students and teachers. Today's program is extremely important and meaningful. Our speaker, Ms. Dana Schwartz, has been a Holocaust speaker for more than 40 years. She was a teacher, a therapist, and worked for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. Now, you will be witnesses to the Holocaust. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Dana Schwartz.
Hi, I was a little girl when the big war started. And by the way, I thought that by doing a bad thing at the park, by picking a flower I wasn't supposed to pick, I had really actually started the bad war. I was playing and there was a little daisy on the grass and I knew I wasn't supposed to pick it, but I wanted it so badly, I picked it. And then I heard a boom and I ran back to my nanny and it terrified that I had done something very, very wrong. And a man with a big white dog ran past us and said, "Go home, the war has started." So I thought that I had done something terrible. I was 4.5. And indeed, the war started. We tried to run away. There was no way to run away. There was no way to run away. Everybody wanted a visa from you to be let into a country, and no country would give Jews a visa. There was a very bad problem with anti-Semitism. The world was very different from what it is now. People weren't mixed colors, mixed names, mixed religions. It was all very similar. And the place where I lived, which was Poland, Jews were not well thought of because they were not like the rest of the population, and for any other reasons that I can never figure out. By the way, excuse me, I have a red eye. Don't let it freak you out, but I have a little broken vein there. I decided that I would like to tell you what a little short piece of time was. Because it would take more than some minutes to tell you the story of the time I went through. So I was 4.5. My dad tried to run away. My mom kept saying, "You mean we're going to leave everything and just run away and leave, you know, our stuff, our silver from the wedding and the painting I love and my clothes?" And my father first said, "But you know, the war is coming probably." And she kept talking and begging to, you know, not go, leave the country. And he said, finally, "Oh, well, this is the 20th century and nobody kills. This is not, you know, this is people are intelligent, they're learned, they know better. What will they do? Kill all the Jews?" Okay, let's go back. And we went back to our apartment. And my dad was wrong. My dad was right. My mom was wrong. We should have run somehow, but we didn't manage it. First, the Russians came to the place where I lived called Lvov. Now it's called Lviv. You may have seen it on TV lately. And now it's Ukraine because everything always changes in that part of the world. I was born, my father was born in the same place, but it was Austria. I was born in the same place, it was Poland. Then I was there, it was the USSR, Russia. Then it was, and then now it's the Ukraine. You just never know where you are. So I always kid around and say I was born in 4 countries, depending on what year you're thinking of. Our lives changed very quickly. when the German knocked on our door, the German looked like a superhero of some kind. He was very tall and he had lots of medals and he had a monocle and he was very seriously dressed with boots and big heavy coat, and he had 2 lieutenants behind him. He knocked on the door and he said to my mother, "I want to see the apartment." And I said, "Mommy," by then I was about 5.5. "Mommy, I want to see how." Shh. He walked around like, a king of whatever, and just walked around and looked and said, "Very nice, very nice." And then he turned to my mother and he said, "Be out in a half an hour and you can each take a little bag. Bye." Out he went. I said, "Mommy, what does he mean?" But he meant get out in a half an hour for good. So we each packed, a couple of a sweater and 1 extra pair of shoes. I had to leave my teddy bear. I had to leave all my stuff. I remember my parents' shoulders, they sort of stood up, raised their heads high, not to frighten me, show pride and strength. And we walked out of our beautiful home. And where did we go? We went to the ghetto. I just want to tell you a little bit about the ghetto. It was very hard to find a place because there were like 150,000 Jews in the city and about 150,000 Jews around from the outlying districts. And they put them all in a ghetto, which was closed off with bricks and wires and gates and stuff. And all of the Jews, so about 300,000 Jews had to go into this ghetto in Lvov. It's hard to find a little place to stay. My dad took his mother, his younger brother who taught chemistry in junior high school, and a lady who caused me a lot of laugh because she was very snooty, she thought she was hot stuff because she'd been married to some official. There's no hot stuff in the ghetto, believe me. So we got a room and a half and we were there. And we had a light and we had water. It was freezing cold. It's a very cold place. And we just kind of huddled and hoped to pass each day without any trouble. One day my dad would go out sometimes. I didn't go out very much at all, but I remember once walking out with my mother, and on the outside of, I hesitate to tell you this story, and I apologize ahead of time. We walked out on the street and there were 3 huge blotches on the wall. The Germans liked to take toddlers by the ankles and smash them on the wall so their brains would splatter, because then they didn't have to use guns, they didn't have to use ammunition, they just wanted to clear out the Jews as much as they could, because that Hitler wanted all the Jews dead, and the government all wanted the same thing, and they put an enormous amount of effort into destroying the Jews, and those splotches were some of it. One day my father came home from walking around, and he had under his coat a big bulge here. And he came home and he pulled out a big bread. We've been so hungry, so little to eat. And this beautiful whole bread was, he cut off the first piece and he gave it to me. And I remember tasting it. It was kind of gritty, but I loved the idea of filling my mouth with food. He said, I have bad news. He said, they're coming. They used to decide on a day or a week or whatever month, I don't know, to clear out the Jews. When I think when the trains came empty, then they would get the Jews out of their buildings, and they would said Germans would go in and make sure that all the Jews were out of the apartments, and they would have them march quietly, politely, very, very quietly. We're going to resettle you. And they would walk down the street, march down the street till the railroad station, and they would put the people in the railroad station. And you know where they would take them. You know, they would take them to concentration camps or killing camps. They were both. And it was called an action. So my father said, an action is coming and we have to find a way to hide. So my grandma, my beautiful little grandma, very quiet, because I guess she knew. And the other lady, the lady that I used to make fun of, I have a story about her, but I won't tell now. That the old ladies had to be hidden someplace. And there was an apartment next door or someplace nearby where there were not 1.5 rooms, there were 2.5 rooms. So they put a couple of the neighbors put their old people in that extra room and they shoved a big cupboard in front of the door. So when the Germans came to say everybody out, they wouldn't notice that there was another room that was blocked by a cupboard. They put them there. They put my grandma there and Mrs. the old lady. And then one morning I woke up and I was in a hole, a deep hole under the building, it was like, I kind of remember being shoved down this kind of tunnel, but I'm not sure. So the morning I woke up and I sat up, and I could sit up because the hole was tall enough for me to sit up. My parents couldn't sit up, but I was little. And I looked around and there were other people there. And I saw Mommy, thank goodness. And I said, Mommy, I have to pee. And she said, well, a bottle will come around. And I said, no, there are other people. And she said, it's okay. They'll all turn away and you'll pee. And of course I had to. And I kept looking and there was nothing to eat, of course. And everybody was quiet and huddled together in corners of this hole. I don't know, was it 12 people? Was it 10, 8? I don't know how many people there were. I can't tell you. But I didn't know them. And we laid there for several. I also don't know how many days or week or weekend, 2 weeks, I'm not sure. How did we exist? My father happened to have a little box of sugar cubes. I don't know if you've ever seen sugar cubes. In Europe, they were popular. You just take a sugar cube, put it in your tea. And he had some sugar cubes and he would pop them in my mouth because I needed the calories to stay alive. I felt bad because I didn't know if they had anything to eat, the other people, but we all kept to ourselves. my dad was next to my mom so that they could talk to each other, whisper to each other. You have to be very quiet. Why did you have to be very quiet? Not only did the Germans come around and look for Jews, but there were still a few non-Jewish people who lived in the apartments, and they didn't have to move at any special time. So we had to be very quiet because those people would give us away. People would give you away because maybe they could get an extra goodie, an apartment, or I don't know what, but they would often give the Jews away. So we had to be quiet. A few days somehow went by, and in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, we would get out through this tunnel-like thing, and we'd go to the courtyard. And the courtyard had a spigot and water. So it was great because we had found several old bottles in that big hole, and we washed them, and we used some for peeing. And pooping was not necessary. Nobody peed much, right? We had a bottle for water, and so we supplied ourselves. And the people would stretch and exercise very quietly. And I would look up in the sky and see the stars and think God could never see us here in this hole. I remember thinking that. I wouldn't exercise, but I would watch them, and then we would all crawl back in through that tunnel sideways hole. And we passed the days, and one day, I think it was night, I'm not sure, but this woman came down from this tunnel with the most horrible thing. What was so horrible? She had a baby at her breast. And the baby was you can imagine, the baby will cry, and the people upstairs will tell the Germans, we heard the baby cry around here someplace, and we'd all be finished. So we were terrified. At one point, we were sorry for the baby, and we were terrified for ourselves. And the baby was like this. No milk was coming out because she hadn't had anything to eat. So she had this baby, and we were kind of, I guess, relieved that the baby was too weak to cry, but horrified that it was doing so badly. She also had 2 toddlers. They were all wrapped up in shawls, so I don't know they were little boys or little girls, what. And she laid down right next to me, and the toddlers laid down next to her ankles, and she had a boy with her who must have been, I guess, 12. And I call him David because I felt like he needed a name. So I always thought of him as David. David was a young boy, but he was strong, and he kept whispering to his mother. I heard him. He kept saying, Mom, if Dad hadn't been taken away, you know what he would have done? He would have said, you go and try to find some food for Mom so she can make milk for the baby. And let me go, Mom, and I'll sneak out and I'll get some food and I'll bring it. And his mother said, no. And I remember her eyes saying, no. She was terrified. She knew, I think, he knew, and she knew how young kids would help their families. This was photographed by the Germans because they thought it was so cute, clever, or whatever. This one guy had a camera, one soldier, and he took pictures. that was found much later, of course, after the war. So the kids would go out on the street when it was dark or when nobody was there. They would lift up a manhole, you know what, you've seen manholes. They lead down to the sewer system. So they would sneak in, go down to the sewer system, and then walk really, really far away out of town inside the sewer system. On the edges, they had like little balconies or little whatever. And they would somehow make it out of town and look in the fields. This occasionally they would find a carrot or a potato or some other kind of vegetable that was left in the earth. And they would tie the bottom of their pants so they could stick it in, it wouldn't fall out. And when they found some, then they would make the long walk back. And, you know, they would come to the manholes and lift them up to look and see whether there was anybody there or if they could sneak up. And the Germans knew about this. So they thought it was great fun. They stood around, smoked their cigarettes, and had their guns cocked and waited for one of these to be moved. I didn't know anything about it. The mother finally knew after he nagged her that there was nothing to do but to send him or they would all die. And she finally acquiesced. And he kissed her, and he kissed the toddlers, and he kissed the baby. Quiet little baby, never cried. And he left. And the mother laid there. And I went to sleep. When I woke up, I saw these horrible, terrified eyes just staring, and waited and waited and waited. And David never came back. And the people in that hole, they were all so horrified and shocked by it. It was so close to them. It was so intimate, you know. And my mother was just, I don't have the word, seeing that tragedy happen. And she kept whispering with my father. And finally, when it got good and dark, my mother and I crawled out of that tunnel hole, and we went upstairs. Of course, I did anything my mother said. I was 7. And she knocked on the next door neighbor of these people were not Jewish, and they were moving away the next day. She knew, my mom knew that. And she knocked on the door and she said, I wish I remembered the lady's name. She said, you know, I have a big favor to ask you. I have this ring. It's got a pretty blue stone on it. Would you take this ring and take my daughter and hide her for a week? So at least I know that she will live for a week. I don't know how she said it, but I didn't say anything. And the lady talked to her husband and decided, okay, they would take me for a week, exactly. And my mother said, be good. And of course I was going to be good and do whatever I had to do. And the next morning they took me to this new apartment. Well, the apartment had 1 bedroom, and there's nothing in the bedroom except this huge pile of newspapers. Whoever was there before, you can imagine, they just never threw anything out. And the lady said, I won't lock you in, but don't come out because people can see you through the window and they know we don't have children and they'll immediately report us. So I said, okay. I was freezing, it's cold. And all I had was this pile of newspapers, but somehow I figured out that I buried myself inside this big pile and I survived. It was okay because the warmth of my body was kind of held in by the newspaper, I guess. They left and I was alone all day and she said, don't walk around, but she didn't say don't crawl around. So I decided, I was very hungry. I decided to crawl out. I crawled out and I was very anxious to see what was in these drawers. You know what I saw? Papers, lined papers, clear papers, squared papers, yellow pencils, pink erasers. I had none of this. I couldn't read. I wanted so badly to learn how to read. I tried reading from that big pile of papers, newspapers, but I could just see red letters and black. I could not make up anything. So when I saw them, I was so, it was like, seeing diamond bracelets all over the place. I don't know. And I quickly closed it. I didn't dare to even touch it, but it was such a beautiful sight. And then I went to the kitchen. I was hungry and there was nothing in the kitchen except a big, huge jar of pickles. Now I was on the floor, I couldn't stand up to go and reach it. But somehow from the floor, I managed somehow to get a pickle. And I forever remember the delicious taste of the pickle and the pickle juice running down my chin. And then I thought, maybe they won't miss 2 pickles. And so every day of that week, I would go into the kitchen and have a pickle party. Came the 7th day, he came, picked me up by the hand. They worked all day. They came home, by the way, I must say, they made soup and I got to eat soup. It was turnip soup. It was not very good, but I was very grateful for the soup. Anyway, he took me by the hand on the 7th day and he brought me right back into the ghetto. And he put me right in the middle of the courtyard. And I realized that the people could see me. And if I crawled into that hole, I would give everybody away. So I sat down on those stairs, those 3 stairs. I put my hand like this and I said, Dad, are you still there? And he said, yes, darling, thank you so much for not giving me away. Slowly walked down to the cell. So I looked like I was aimlessly walking around and I went down to the cell. And I want to I know I don't have much time, but I want to tell you what happened to my mother in that week. She had a week not to worry about me, but just to stay alive. So she, that same night, went to a guy on the other side of the building and said, look, I have this ring with a red stone. It's very pretty. It's maybe you'd like to have it for weeks, hiding me someplace. And he looked at the ring. He was a big, tall, blonde guy, and he figured, oh yeah, he could give it to somebody. I don't know. But anyway, he said, yes, he'd take it. And so he took it, and next morning they walked out. Now, you know, the guards knew him as a non-Jew, and they just waved him on, and he could go out, and he took her to his office, which was on the second floor of some building. And he said, there's no water here, there's no bathroom, there's nothing. I'll go bring you some food, but I have to lock you out from the outside. Okay, thank you. And she waited and she waited and she waited. And he never came. Day came, night came, next day came. I don't know quite how long exactly, but she knew he wasn't coming back. She kept looking outside. She was on the second floor, and she kept looking and looking. And she saw this big tree and branch, and she kept looking. And all of a sudden she thought, maybe not so all of a sudden, there's a branch. What if she could lunge to that branch and free herself? Because obviously after days, she was dying of thirst and hunger, and she knew he wasn't coming. He didn't care. So she lunged, she opened it, and she lunged, and she grabbed hold of this branch, and she made her way over to the trunk, and she sort of shimmied down. And she was exhausted and scared, and she didn't know what to do next. And she remembered the nanny that had me at the park at the beginning of the war. Maybe she lived around here, and she would look at the outside of the building with the names of who lives there. And she finally found actually the nanny. And she went and found her in the top floor, and she knocked on the door, and the woman said, what are you doing here? You'll get us in trouble. And she begged her, I'm so hungry, I'm so thirsty, please, I'm so cold, please help me. And the woman says, if I take you inside, my husband will immediately give you away. But if you sit upstairs on the top step, when he goes to sleep, I'll take you down to the cellar. Oh, my mother was happy. She sat. Sure enough, the guy went to sleep early. And the woman took her downstairs. In there, they had like little rooms where you could, every apartment had a room where you could stash your bag of potatoes or even a folding bed or something. And we could lock it up. And she opened the bed for her. She gave her a blanket and a pillow, and she brought her some hot soup and hot potatoes. And my mother was so grateful, and she rested there for several days, and she was taken care of. It was dark and quiet, and she could rest and come back out of the horror. One night, she hears boots. Boots were a terrible sound. Bunch of boots coming, and the Nazis saying, janitor, come open these doors. Even outside of the ghetto, somebody might be hiding here. The Jews might be hiding here. And he came with his ring of key, big ring of keys from each apartment, and he started opening doors, and they would shine flashlights and cock their guns. They went from one room to the next room to the next room, and my mother knew that this was the end. She prayed and she waited. All of a sudden, a little dog came by and started playing. Oh, I didn't tell you. The janitor could not find the right key. So they said, well, where's the key? He said, the lady upstairs will go get her, go get the key. And they're waiting. And this dog comes and jumps on their legs and runs away, and jumps on their legs and runs away. And they've got their guns cocked and ready to continue, but this dog is so much fun. And they say, you know what, this dog must want us to see something. He must be leading us somewhere, because he keeps going that way and back. Let's go what he has. Maybe he wants to show us something. Let's go. And just as the guy comes with the key, they say, never mind, we're going to follow the dog. A few hours later, the nanny came down and said we were in terrible trouble, and my mother apologized profusely and thanked her. And you know, it was such a big thing she had done. So she thanked her and she left. And she went back into the ghetto. And of course, you can go into the ghetto. It's just coming out of the ghetto that was impossible. And she had walked into the courtyard of our place, that big apartment building, and somehow given my dad a sign also without being obvious, you know, so that, and she had gone down to the cellar. So imagine this 7-year-old not knowing if she would ever see her mommy again, walking into the cellar and finding her mommy. Very shortly after, the main thing was over that action. It's like, you know, the action I perhaps didn't describe to you. There was like cowboys herding cattle onto the train. It's exactly like that. It had quieted down, and my father had come out of the hole, and my mother and I were together again. And my mother said, we've got to get out of here somehow. My dad went for a walk, and he found an old friend. When the friend, who I think had a crush on my mother, she's a very pretty lady, he said, how is your wife? How is Lucia? My father said, she's very upset. She's very nervous. She wants to try to escape in some way. And he said, you know, I know some people that can get us papers for money, fake papers. So my dad came home, told us about it. My mother said, yes, 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 let's do it. And he went back and he gave him money. The guy gave him the papers. And then we had to decide a very silly thing. You know, we had to have different religion and different names. So we had a Jewish last name. It was Shapira. And we couldn't have that name, so we had to think of a name, but we had to think of a name that was very Polish or very not Jewish. And you know that Jews don't, religious Jews don't eat pig. So my mother and father and I sat there, and they thought of a very funny name for us, which I will translate into English. It was like Baconovsky. Anybody whose name is Baconovsky can't possibly be Jewish, right? So we decided on the last name of Baconovsky. Luckily, my name, Danusha, was also a Polish name. It was a name of a Polish queen of old. So anyway, now we have the papers. We filled in the papers, but how to get out and how to leave and where to go. My father found a man who had come from some small village far away to sell eggs. I think it was eggs. And he said to him, I will give you money if you take my wife and child with you and say that this is your brother's wife and child, that you don't know what happened to your brother, but you kind of have to look out for her because she's family. And just find her a place to sleep. But say that, and that's it. And then you tell that you can say, I don't really like her, and sort of fade away. Okay. So here we were in the ghetto, and I don't know how they got me out of the ghetto. I heard stories about people hiding children under skirts. I don't know how I was spirited out of the ghetto at night, but suddenly I no longer had my Star of David on my arm, and neither did my mother. I don't know what that bell meant, so I'll just continue.
You have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. Okay, and so somehow I was snuck out, and somehow that man really wanted to do this, probably for the money. And so I had to say goodbye to my father, who had his Star of David, and my arms I had to pretend I did not know my father, and I wanted to hug him goodbye. But it was so very hard for me to pretend that I didn't know him. But it was dangerous, because what non-Jewish child would be hugging a Jewish person? That was impossible. So the guard would have seen it. Anyway, it was a tragic goodbye because I could not give him a hug. And we did connect with that man who sold the eggs. He took us to a small town, the tiny little village. It was very hard, but we pretended to be not Jewish. And my mother went to the baker and said, you know, I'm from the city. I have a platinum watch, and I have my engagement ring, and I have 2 dresses from the city, and you have a beautiful wife. Do you want, I'll give you everything for her if you promise me to give me a piece of bread every day. He was a baker. So he said yes, because she was thrilled. So we lived on that bread every day, and we did not need to eat anything else except a carrot or something once in a while. And we survived in that little village, pretending to be somebody else. I saw horrors, but I can't describe to you. I could have written things, but we survived there. Miraculously, my mother and I survived, but everybody else was killed by everybody. I was the luckiest girl in the world, and somehow after many years, came to America. My mother came, but she died very shortly after. But I was able to go to school. I was 17 when she died. I went to school because I wanted to be a school teacher, because I had never been in school, and that's where I wanted, and that's where I thought I'd be happiest. I had a wonderful life. I went back to Poland. I went to that little village. Just 47 years later, I found the baker's daughter. She took me to the baker, and the old lady, and they were very old ladies, old people. And my husband said, ask them if they have anything of your mother's. everybody was dead. It would have been nice to have something. And she said, yes, we have the engagement ring. And so after much discussion, and I would have given them anything, I found the wedding ring, the very wedding ring that fed us during the war. We ate nothing else. Fed us for several months during the war with bread, and I bought it back, and I haven't stopped wearing it. And I've had a wonderful life. A wonderful life. I married a wonderful guy who was a doctor. And I had 3 sons who are wonderful guys and have given me wonderful grandchildren. And I'm so grateful, but it was so very sad to lose everybody and be alone until I made my own family. I know it's time. So David, if you want to finish, or if there are questions, I believe that it's time for me. Please ask.
Yeah. So students, give thank you, applause. Thank you so much. It's so important, the words that you've heard, and you will get to write what you've learned and how you feel, what you think. You know, you're going to write thank you letters, but you know, it becomes your responsibility, students, that the world that Ms. Schwartz had to go through, that this never happens again in any respect, in anywhere, in America and in anywhere in the world. And you need to say something and do something if you see any kind of hate, which includes bullying, because that's a form of hate. But if you have any questions, we have a couple of minutes. If you could put it into the chat, teachers.
We have one.
What do you hope people will learn from the Holocaust in your experience? That's a question.
You know, people can believe the way they want to believe, God, the universe, whatever. Please don't kill them for it.
Mm.
You know, let people have the freedom. Don't kill people because they're different from you or because you don't understand them. Try to make it one world. This globe of ours, maybe not the only one in the universe, who knows? Let's live in peace. There's such beauty in the world. There's such creativity. There's such joy. Why see the bad when you can see the good? I've seen the good in the world, and I've had such happy, joyous life. And I hope that touching you with a little bit of my story will make you know that everybody needs respect. Please live and let live. And be positive, because if you are, life will be good to you.
How long did it take you to recover from this?
That was a question. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Honestly, deep down inside, there are things that never got well. I always have that reaction. Oh my goodness, I can eat more. You mean you're serving dinner and you're asking me if I want another? Oh my God, of course I want another. because I had so little. So there are many things, you know, an airplane running overhead makes me think of bombs, things that, but I handle them most of the time. I didn't get big inside. I would have if I hadn't, you know, taken care of that or understood it enough. I believe, you know, I believe in getting help when things are bad. I believe that in your worst times, you should know that things will be better. I believe that you have to have courage, and you'll be so glad you did later on. I believe in having good friends and loving your parents who did so much for me and for you.